Take care.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to St. Peter's University. We have an exciting event for you tonight. We have two very distinguished alumni who are going to share their stories, their experiences with everyone here in our audience. I'd like to welcome Dr. Hampton's business students and Dr. Merlino's health sciences students. Thank you for joining. We have plenty of food, so please feel free to enjoy. You can get up and have food. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Fred Bonato, our Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost of St. Peter's, and he's going to introduce our speakers for this evening. And again, welcome everybody to St. Peter's.
Welcome, everyone. Students, alumni, faculty and staff, and family members, friends and former classmates of our speakers for tonight's session, the intersection of science and medicine, public health, education, and business. Tonight's sesquicentennial event is sponsored by the Deans of the College of Arts and Sciences, Dr. Wei-Dong Zhu, the Frank J. Guarini School of Business, Mary Kate Natus, the Caulfield School of Education with Joe Doria, but we have interim dean here tonight, Anna Ciccarelli, and the School of Nursing, Lauren O'Hare. We are so grateful for our two distinguished alumni whose careers have included many fascinating areas and who traveled here from Berkeley, California, and Baltimore, Maryland, to share their journeys from St. Peter's College to positions in healthcare, government, and academia during transformative moments in our nation's history. Dr. Richard Jackson, class of 1969, is Professor Emeritus of Public Health at UCLA, where he was Department Chair in Environmental Health Sciences. A pediatrician, he served with the California Health Department, including as the state health officer. For 9 years, he was director of the CDC's National Center for Environmental Health. He's an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine. He's won numerous awards, including the Hero Award from the Breast Cancer Fund, Lifetime Achievement Awards from the Public Health Law Association, and from the New Partners for Smart Growth, the John Hines Award for National Leadership in the Environment, the Sedgwick Memorial Medal, the highest award of the American Public Health Association for Distinguished Service, and the Henry Hope Reed Award for his contributions to architecture. Jackson lectures on issues related to climate, heating, environment, and health, and hosted the PBS series Designing Healthy Communities. He's an elected honorary member of the American Institute of Architects and of the American Society of Landscape Architects. Dr. Jackson completed his BA in biology at St. Peter's College, MMS at Rutgers Medical School, MD at UC San Francisco, and MPH in epidemiology at UC Berkeley. Dick and his spouse, Joan, live in Berkeley, California, and have 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren. 7 grandchildren. Apologies.
You need to update the brief bio.
Dr. Thomas Burke, class of 1974, is the Jacob I. and Irene B. Fabricant Professor and Chair in Health Risk and Society at Johns Hopkins University, Bloomberg School of Public Health, Department of Health Policy and Management, with a joint appointment in the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering. He's also director of the Johns Hopkins Risk Sciences and Public Policy Institute. Dr. Burke was nominated by President Barack Obama to serve as EPA Assistant Administrator for the Office of Research and Development. From January 2015 until January 2017, Dr. Burke was the EPA Science Advisor and Deputy Assistant Administrator for Research and Development. His research interests include environmental epidemiology and surveillance, evaluation of population exposures to environmental pollutants, assessment and communication of environmental risks, and application of epidemiology and health risk assessment to public policy. Before joining the university faculty, Dr. Burke was Deputy Commissioner of Health for the state of New Jersey and Director of Science and Research for the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. In New Jersey, he directed initiatives that influenced the development of national programs such as Superfund, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the Toxics Release Inventory. Dr. Burke served as a member of the National Academy of Sciences Board on Environmental Studies and Toxicology. He was chair of the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Improving Risk Analysis that produced the report Science and Decisions, and chaired the NAS Committee on Human Biomonitoring for Environmental Toxicants. He is a fellow of the Society for Risk Analysis and a lifetime National Associate of the National Academies. Dr. Burke received his BS from St. Peter's University, his MPH from the University of Texas, and his PhD in epidemiology from the University of Pennsylvania. In short, Dr. Burke and Dr. Jackson are internationally recognized experts and contributors in their fields and are among the most distinguished alumni. They're also friends and colleagues who have so many great stories to share and who credit their Jesuit education at St. Peter's in Jersey City as playing an integral role in their professional lives. We are so grateful to Tom and Dick and their families and friends for joining us here tonight. And we are in good hands for this discussion with our fearless moderator, Ernabel DeMillo, who is an Emmy Award-winning journalist and chair of the Department of Communication and Media Culture and tenured journalism lecturer at St. Peter's University. Ernabel is a veteran New York City broadcaster who worked as a reporter and anchor on the Emmy Award-winning Fox morning news show, Good Day New York. Before coming to New York, she was a reporter for the Orange County News Channel and the CBS affiliate in Sacramento. And now I ask our moderator and our distinguished alumni to join us up front in these seats for our discussion. There will be time for Q&A with the audience towards the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. So I have to say, you two are such underachievers, right? Come on, step it up. So it is my honor to be here and to lead this conversation. I'm really excited. It's so nice to actually meet both of you in person, and I'm so glad that we are actually doing this in person, right? And not on a Zoom room. Yeah. So, You both were here on campus about, I don't know, 40, 50 years ago, give or take a year, right? Because I want to talk about that time. Let's go back to the early years and what it was like, for you. So, Dick, you graduated in 1969, and that was a very interesting time.
Oh my. As we were walking around beforehand, I looked the steps of the next building, and I said to Mary Kate, that was the classroom where I was sitting on Friday, November 22nd, 1963, when a student opened the door in Father Landy's English class and said, President Kennedy has been shot. And that was the end of class, of course, and I didn't know where to go, so I wandered down the hill to my Uncle Bill and Aunt Sue's house on Delaware Avenue in Jersey City, and as I walked along, people were literally standing on the street corners weeping. And it was as if it was as big as Pearl Harbor, and particularly in Irish Catholic Jersey City. And I had been on the swim team then, and I didn't know what to do, and I decided I'd go down to practice. It was in the little pool at the public school down there. But I went home, and we just sat and watched TV for the whole weekend. And I was worried about going back to school on Monday because I didn't do any work. And I went into Father Landy's class on Monday, and he said, don't worry about it. None of us did any work either. Maybe I just want to say quickly, because I got to know Ted Kennedy working on pesticide issues. The sense of growing up in a setting where there are much bigger issues than your ego or your occasional broken heart or other things, and that you have an obligation to serve the world was something that was really profound. It's probably the biggest thing I took away from my time with the Society of Jesus and with St. Peter's College. It was such a transformative time in my life.
Thank you, Dick. And Tom, you graduated in 74.
I was much younger.
Much younger. What made you decide to enroll here?
Well, I like to joke. I could have gone to Harvard, but I went to St. Peter's. It was the only place I applied to. I'm from down the hill. I lived right over there. Yeah. How's that? So is that, John.
It's the spirit of St. Peter.
All right. Okay. So I was very fortunate, and actually I started being influenced by the Jesuits when I was in 6th grade. I was in the Higher Achievement Program for inner city kids. It was one of President Johnson's funding for inner city kids to give us poor kids from the inner city a chance to go to school during the summer. And so I actually went through the Higher Achievement Program and was really fortunate to get into St. Peter's Prep as a result of that. And we continued. It's just been a great ride. I'm poor Irish, first-generation kid, right? And my brother John came here, was a commissioned officer. He went through ROTC, and it was the place. And I came here to do the science because, shout out to SPC, I keep saying, but the Peacock basketball team, right? I mean, you just gotta, it's so amazing now. But back then in '68 when they beat Duke, we were also on fire about basketball here and basketball player. It was just a wonderful place to be and a great science institution too. So that was why I was here, but also because from Jersey City, this was just a wonderful place to be. So many of my friends were here. My sister graduated here, Jane. My wife graduated here. I was married down in the chapel. It's now something different right here. So it's just been in the blood of the Burke family.
So you were were here in '68, which was, I mean, along with the basketball team doing really, really well, right? Yeah, did. I mean, so much was going on in the world. The civil rights movement, Martin Luther King was assassinated, and then the Vietnam War. So, with all that was going on in the world, what was it like to be a student with sort of like the world swirling around you? Very similar to maybe like what's going on now, you know, with the pandemic, now with the war in Ukraine, which I think when we spoke, I don't think that was even happening, right? It seems like there's always something new. What was it like back then?
I graduated SS Catholic High School in New York in '63, and the world still seemed pretty orderly. And I came over to St. Peter's, and I remember going to my first ROTC thing, and I had to get a uniform. I looked kind of ridiculous because I looked about 13 years old. My Uncle Bill would take videos of me marching down to the park and being the corner guard as we went past streets and carrying a decommissioned M1 rifle. I'm going to say something I'm a little embarrassed by. I was very bookish, I was a good student, and I was very immature. I really was not ready for college, and I'm not saying that's why I went to the Society of Jesus and went up to St. Andrew on Hudson in Poughkeepsie, New York, and prayed 5 hours a day and meditated for the next 2 years in the novitiate. And I met wonderful friends, including Father Kenneth Bullard, who's here from Xavier, where he's the pastor, and he had been the president of PrEP. And these are friends that I've kept my whole life. And the funny thing about being in the seminary with 35 other people in my group is it was like doing a skinny needle biopsy of humanity, because every both excellent and defective personality you could imagine, you had a sample of each one of them that you had to learn how to deal with. And in this compressed environment, it's like being on a submarine without exaggeration. I left partly because it was what I needed to do. My brother Jim was in Vietnam at the time, and he had been a Marine. He was there for 2 full years, and he was the only one to survive intact of his entire platoon. And I got home to Nutley, and there were the room where the 5 boys had grown up, and the 2 girls were in the other room. And Jim says to me, "Don't go to Vietnam. No matter what you have to do, do not go." And he had just come back, and he was a mess, emotionally and physically. He was still in great shape. And by then, things had really changed. Our OTC had become optional. They were now girl students, and believe me, fresh out of the seminary, I was glad that happened, but the ratio wasn't great because there were about 9 guys for every girl. But I really enjoyed it, but what am I going to do? And I had no idea. And I had been an English major, and literally I was a math major, an English major, a philosophy major, and I decided, I think I'm going to go to medical school. And I jammed all of pre-med into about 2 years, which was a busy time while I was working over at the Colgate-Palmolive plant at the same time, and was lucky enough to get into Rutgers. But we were in protests walking down Kennedy Boulevard against the war, and there would be police officers standing taking our photographs one after another. And I had student friends who lived just down on Glenwood Avenue who would be raided by the cops, and they would go through and rifle the drawers and turn everything in the dressers over and say they found marijuana in the apartment, and they would be dealing with that. It was quite an education to realize that this, my dad was a fighter pilot in World War II. I grew up loving this country, but I had become very frightened of misdirected political power. And my graduation from St. Peter's was, my Uncle Bill was the fire chief of Jersey City. We were over at Roosevelt Field, and the kids were screaming at the bishop during this thing, and it was, you think America's polarized now, the feeling of it was extreme and a very nervous making. And that's sort of a sad story, but the good part of the story is that for me, the career in medicine has been one of the greatest gifts in my life. And I had a wonderful family, and after my family, and really the Society of Jesus and what I got out of that, and then medicine, what tremendous, how lucky I've been. And frankly, given the life I've led, how lucky I am to still be alive.
Thank you, Dick. So I want, because you're a Jersey City boy, Tom, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So it's working now?
Oh, is it? I don't think it is. Frankie? Yeah. Is it?
Oh, great.
Oh, good, good.
Okay.
So, you know, 'cause we're talking now about Shaheen Holloway, the basketball coach's now famous quote, right? I got guys from New Jersey, when he was asked, like, are they scared, right? And he said, I've got guys from New Jersey, New York City. You think we're scared of anything? You think we're worried about guys trying to muscle us and tough us out? We do that. That's who we are. And I know for you, this is also who you are, right? And we had talked about how tough Jersey City made you as you pursued your career. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, so it's great to see my sisters here and my family. We're from the Junction, from St. Pat's Parish, all right? I found out when I started going to high school that other kids weren't allowed to come play in our neighborhood because it was too scary. I said, didn't you? To play basketball? Oh no, I wasn't allowed to go there. So you didn't get off. You know, maybe you took the bus down to Greenville to go down to St. Peter's, or the high schools were mostly in St. Al's where my sister went. But it was a tough place. But it was a great place. And you didn't realize how tough it was, but you had to be fearless or you couldn't make it back to the house from the bus, right? And that's just how it was. Not unlike some neighborhoods in Baltimore right now, not too far from the great hospital and the great school of public health I work at now. So yeah, we came up, and I think that fearlessness was part of St. Peter's as well. This was not a fun and games college. We had local kids, just like Coach Holloway said, kids from New York, kids from Jersey City, who were coming here to work hard and to better themselves. And most of us were first generation. And most of us worked after school, worked on the weekends, and it was about being tough. And you know, you're here late at an event and you're waiting for the bus on Montgomery Street to go home to St. Pat's, right? Or to the Junction, or Lifton Place, which is now condos. So there's toughness. And I think in public health, you know, fast forward, working in government, I got to work in City Hall, I got to work with governors in New Jersey. New Jersey's a tough state. Doing public health is tough. Tony Fauci's not the first one to have death threats. All right, gotta tell you. When I was a state official in New Jersey negotiating with big industry, I was told, Dr. Burr, we break legs. And this is no disrespect, a leading attorney for a very big corporation. And so, yeah, Dick, I would say that we pushed against the grain through our careers, and fearlessness is part of growing up here, and it followed me throughout my career, and I hope it's still part of the fearlessness of achievement, because don't tell a kid from St. Peter's you can't do something. He'll do it. She'll do it.
Yeah. What did you study here when you were here, and how did that, you know,
Well,
inform what you eventually did?
When I was a kid,
Hello.
When I was a kid, I had a second chance in life because I was born with a big hole in my heart. And this great, wonderful doctor right over there on Glenwood Avenue referred me down to Johns Hopkins. And when I was 15, I had open heart surgery that saved my life. I remember my father saying, well, he said, he needs an operation. And my father said, well, what if he doesn't get the operation? And they said, well, he'll never live to be an adult. So I was like, okay, well, let's do this thing. And so there's a second chance, but that gave me an interest in biology, an interest in the sciences, wanting to know why, still studying why. I think has to do with our environment, and our environment is so important in our health. And so I studied biology, but, and I want to talk to the health sciences, I'm not an MD, right? But I feel very fortunate to have risen to being a professor at Johns Hopkins, that same place that saved my life. But it's not for everybody to be a clinician. And that damn organic chemistry. When I was also working 2 jobs, it just took me out of the running, right? But that's another story. There are so many incredible jobs in the medical fields, and I want you to know that I've worked with the best clinicians in the world. I work at the #1 school of public health in the world, and you can achieve in so many ways with the St. Peter's education. So I loused up organic chemistry, but I was really good in biology and really good in environmental science.
And that's also really tough for a lot of like first-gen students to convince their parents that they don't have to be a doctor. Because that is, for many, immigrant parents, the end-all be-all, the reason why they came to America, so that their children can be the doctors and the lawyers and the CEOs of companies, the American dream.
I have to share that because it's so important. At graduation, I had a wonderful student, Chinese student, and she was there with her parents. And I said, you should be very proud. She's been such a leader and one of our greatest students. And they were disappointed it was a PhD in epidemiology, not an MD. And I said, she will achieve such great things. And PhD in epi isn't bad. But I think we have that. And certainly, when I was growing up, who knew about epidemiology? Who even knew about public health? You respected the doctors. But the health fields are so wide open and so broad, and there's so many ways to discover new science and to make changes. And maybe I didn't treat kids with heart defects, but I think I prevented a lot of heart defects with all those things that I helped change in New Jersey, in Jersey City, and really throughout the world.
Thank you. So this panel is called The Intersection of Science and Medicine, Public Health, Education, and Business. So I really don't know why I'm the moderating this, because that is nothing that I have studied. And you both have been involved in all of these, right? So what are the issues now, that are facing science, and I know this is such a big question, public policy and advocacy, and can you address that through the lens of a social justice and Jesuit lens?
When I was at CDC, I was there close to 10 years as the Director of Environmental Health for the United States of America. And we had, the first thing I had done a lot of work with farm workers, and we'd go out to investigate 100 farm workers, sick as could be in a field, vomiting in the hot sun, and just poisoned with the chemicals they put on the crop that people were working clean, harvesting. And I found very quickly that the agricultural commissioner really, we just assumed they went away. They were undocumented, they were poor, they didn't speak English. The labor contractor would just soon dump them off at their huts and just go on. We'd go to the emergency room, and I discovered that about 15% of the people out there, probably 40% were women, and there was always about 10 women who were pregnant. And I realized that none of these tests for the chemicals that they were using captured risks to the fetus, and captured long-term risks. In fact, many of them had turned out to be carcinogens. And so I began to really pursue getting the tests done for that. And it took me 10 years to learn pesticides. I'm not making it up. It was far more complicated than pharmacology, partly because they were using so many different mixes of it. Tom was the head of this part of EPA when he was there, by the way. And so one of the first things I did when I went to CDC was to push our laboratory. It was a very good lab from Agent Orange work, but I said I want to be able to analyze hundreds of pesticides and hormones and other things in the bodies of the workers, because I had no way of proving the worker was poisoned or the child was poisoned without a lab value. And we eventually achieved that, and it was a big center. It had radiation hazards and downwinders from nuclear blasts and destruction of the chemical weapons of the United States. All this stuff that I thought I'd never hear again until the Ukraine war. And But I had the Refugee and International Health Group, and we had about 25 people that we would send over to really places that you didn't go on vacation to, whether it was earthquakes or huge. We had people after those awful wars in Central Africa between the Hutus and the Tutsis, and we literally would have some of our officers come home in terrible PTSD from seeing a church filled with 5 layered bodies 5 feet deep. And, but I quickly learned that disasters are the future of humanity. And during that same time, I was, had been dealing with the White House and a bunch of things, and the head of the White House Science Office said to me, you know, the stuff you're worried about is small change. What you really should be worried about is climate. And I kind of knew it, but I didn't really know it. The month before I went to, the month after I graduated from St. Peter's, the man landed on the moon, Armstrong did. The CO2 of planet Earth was 320. The CO2 of planet Earth right now is 420. It's gone up more in just my short lifetime in medicine than it had in the previous hundreds of thousands of years. And anytime you put more CO2, you put more heat in the atmosphere, you put more energy in the atmosphere, and the number of violent storms has gone up, you know, from 2 to 3. The idea of a once in a 500-year storm is now happening twice in 10 years in a lot of places. And CDC's in Atlanta, so I was going around and I vowed I would never give another talk as long as I live without talking about climate change. Smart guy that I was, right? So I go speak in Atlanta and I go speak in Florida, and I start talking about climate, and I thought people were going to riot. They thought, oh, you're a communist, you're talking about this stuff going on in the atmosphere. Why are you upsetting people? I said, well, frankly, I am very upset about the world I'm giving my children and the world I'm giving my grandchildren. And we've got to do all we can, because I fear that climate change is going to make this pandemic look like small change. And believe me, I was state health officer for California. I'm passionate about so many of the public health issues, including immunization. And I'll just mention it outright. My own dad, the fighter pilot, died at 49 of polio. He died in 3 days, leaving my mother, 27 years old, with 3 babies. And she married and had 4 more children. 2 of my wonderful sisters are here. But, you know, this is actually a very important thing. I'm just going to say it. For the students in the room, as you think about your own pain in your own life, you don't get to 20 without pain. Oftentimes that pain is telling you what you ought to be doing with your life and where you ought to dedicate your energies. And instead of thinking this as a burden, and it is a burden, but think of it as a gift, a way of, it's almost God's grace coming to you and saying, okay, this is what's going to be important to you. I sort of danced around your question, but these are things on my mind.
We want to hear that. Thank you. It's almost like a calling. It was, for you, a calling to do what you were doing.
And you know, it's a relief. When you finally say, you know, I'm not going to do those 6 other things, I'm going to do this. It was a relief. And guess what? I got to do it anyway. I got to work with architects and all the things that I really enjoyed for the last 20 years. But it took 30 years to get there.
How about you, Tom? Did you, through the work that you're doing too, you know, how your Jesuit education informs how you deal with the world?
Well, I think we're fun. Dick talked about climate change and the respect for our Earth. And what I'm working on most right now is environmental justice. Environmental justice has finally risen to the fore as part of the president's budget, the recognition of the need to understand our most vulnerable communities and the fence-line communities that many of us were here in Jersey City. We play on the chemical mountains from the chromate facilities. New Jersey is redeveloping and doing great now because we cleaned up those facilities and we had good public health guiding us. And so what I'm working on is equity, is fairness for the fence-line communities, monitoring down in the Texas area and the Gulf Coast. But really here in New Jersey, when I was health commissioner here, you show me, and probably one of the most moving things I've ever done was was to be there doing the science in Flint, Michigan, when we had that crisis during President Obama's administration, which has now led to the funding to take lead out of lead pipes throughout the country. And Newark is leading the way, right? Our own Jersey governor, I think, is doing great things that way. And so I think the Jesuit approach, to be a person for others, to be fair, to work toward equity, and understand that we're all in this together, was always very fundamental to my education. You didn't do it because it was for you. You worked for others, and that's the Jesuit way. That was the St. Peter's way. That's how I feel about all my colleagues now who have come through St. Peter's and other Jesuit institutions. You can almost kind of pick them out.
You really feel like brothers.
Yeah, it's like, where'd you go to college? And we really didn't know each other when we were here, but we got together professionally. And there's something about that, and it's that sense of fairness and equity and equality that is so big in environmental health right now. I'm working on that. But I'm also doing some cool things on preparedness and emergencies, and I've got some good stories about the continuity of government and the administration as we worry about major disasters, because we were also moved by 9/11. We all know about the vulnerability of this country, and unfortunately, a lot of us grew up doing duck and cover and dealing with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and here we are again, on the cusp of really existential threats to our health, whether it's climate or thermonuclear exchange. I can't believe we're saying it again, but that's about public health too.
So how did you two of you, yeah, please.
Well, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just wondering, like, how you two met.
Yeah. Oh.
Not that I wanted to lighten it up, all that talk of climate change.
Well, so earlier in our careers, we're not shy, all right? And I was very fortunate at a ridiculously young age to have an appointment in New Jersey to head the toxic substances program here in Trenton, New Jersey, because that was my passion. I truly, for the family, I wanted to know why Daddy died of lung cancer, and why Hudson County had the highest lung cancer rates in the entire country. Now, there are a bunch of veterans who were smoking and drinking, and it's a hard-living place, but we also had the highest concentration of chromium contamination in the world. Potent lung carcinogen. Yes. And so I'm working in New Jersey on changing our environmental laws, doing the science to see what's in our water, to see what's in our air, to see what's in our soil, and to start moving towards superfunding cleanups. And Dick is doing the same job out in California. And we discovered each other, and we had both coasts and two really influential states that had very supportive governors.
So we're at this meeting, and it was held at Noah's Ark in St. Louis, Missouri. It was this goofy, it was a national meeting, but they held it at a hotel. The theme was zoo animals. And you'll be surprised that a couple of Irishmen found their way to the bar at the end of these day of talks. And he starts talking, I think, God, you sound like my family. And then we suddenly discover we have the exact same set of values. And it was almost by the end of the night, as if we had known each other for the prior 10 years. That there was a fraternity, if you will. It was a secret handshake. I don't know what it was, but our values were so simpatico. And man, oh man, that's one of the most important things you can do in your life is don't waste your time with people with crappy values. And as President Biden's talking about Mr. Putin roundly. And it really was I want to try to trigger one more moment. I'll just make a quick comment. So I arrived in San Francisco. It's pretty crazy. It's flower power, but they don't have winter time. And I was having a lot of fun. I was working my tail off, to be honest. But I had a chance to come back to Jersey for the Christmas break. And I'm there at the airport, and somebody said to me, "Where are you from?" And I was with another guy, and they said, "I'm from New York." And he goes, "You're not from New York. You're from New Jersey. Have pride about where you came from." And I felt about this tall. I never did it again, and he was absolutely right. And I then, by the way, explaining in California what St. Peter's was and why we were called peacocks was a lot harder. But that won't be hard anymore. But I'm going to say something that I really want to say to the students. New Jersey is what America will be. The United States was 140 million people when I was born. It's 325, 330 million people now. The issues of density, the issues of manufacturing, the issues of waste disposal and worker safety. You know, the worst worker safety events were the Bayway refinery that in one day killed 16 workers from tetraethyl lead being put in the gasoline. Folks just like you going to work and having seizures and dying at the place. My mom talked about growing up in East Orange, New Jersey, and knowing women walking around with their jaws rotted off because they were painting radium dials on the watches and clocks. And there's a book about it, The Radium Girls. And she said, it's very frightening. I was like 4 or 5 years old. Women would walk around like bandits with the mask over their lower face so that they couldn't be seen. And in Nutley, where we eventually lived, my brothers would go up to the creek that went through Nutley, and it came out of Hoffman La Roche. And they'd have contests to see who could collect the most deformed tadpoles in an hour. And who knows if a chemical's coming out of it. They were making a lot of sulfonamides, and they're pretty active chemicals, as Tom knows. And Tom was looking at basements in Jersey City, and I won't tell his story for him.
Well, what a great honor to lead the state's investigation of chromium in Jersey City as a Jersey City kid. So chromium, you all know how cool cars look when they have real shiny bumpers and everything else like that, right? Well, in this country, the great skyscrapers of New York, the great Art Deco period, we had an insatiable desire for chrome steel, stainless steel, shiny things. And Hudson County was the leading manufacturer of chromate that was that core of that entire industry. It's used for other things too, like dyes and film, Kodachrome film, but it is a very potent human carcinogen and cancers, and it causes respiratory cancer. And perhaps when it gets in your drinking water, we're now understanding it might lead to intestinal cancers as well. And so, as Deputy Commissioner of Health and the head of environmental health for the state, I've worked with the city. The city for a long time denied. And so that area of Caven Point Road, which is now Liberty State Park, and just such a wonderful national treasure, right? We started to sample that and test it and understand all the sites in Jersey City. And some of the best construction sites, the best redevelopment, the wonderful rebirth of particularly downtown, but also the waterfront in New Jersey, couldn't have happened without good public health and understanding the chromium challenge and acknowledging our problems, working with the business community to find solutions. And I know business students are here too, and I also have relatives who studied accounting and business here, and what a great business education you also get at St. Peter's. Well, healthy businesses who care for their workers, who care about healthy community redevelopment, who care about environmental justice when you're redeveloping a community and work toward healthy communities can really be transformative. And I'm really hoping that's where we're going in Jersey City, and we're rediscovering some of the greatness of this place.
You know, I know we talked about this when we were doing our little pre-interview when I first got to meet both of you, about how this generation, Gen Z, the young millennials, they're a little different. Actually, they're similar to your generation. They are really advocates for social justice, especially with everything that's going on with Black Lives Matter, the racial inequality, and also because of, climate change. And you are both also professors, right? So you talk to a lot of young people. Do you also sense that we have come full circle in terms of the kind of students that we have now that hopefully will be saved by this generation?
I'll start, Tom, if you don't mind, but one is, and I'm just going to tell you outright, my favorite students are ones that come from, didn't have the way paid for them and are handed a BMW when they graduate high school. And the first generation students really work hard. And they don't expect things to be given them. And I got really tired of spoiled kids that the parents are demanding they go to pre-med, and they're fighting over every grade, every question on the exams. Because, you want to be a doctor because you want to take care of people, not because your parents told you to, or because, you want to make a lot of money. And by the way, Tom and I, thank God we're comfortable, but neither one of us got rich. But I wouldn't change it for the world. But I was teaching the day after a really catastrophic event. There were about 150 students in the class. I would say it was about 80% women, 75%, and maybe 20 of the students were dreamers. They weren't. They were there in California without families moved them to the United States when they were very young children, and they were so upset. And I threw away the talk I was preparing to give, and I said, "Look, are you worried?" And literally, they were crying. I said, "I'm going to tell you something. Pick one thing. You cannot take on the whole world. So if you're interested in one chemical, you're interested in social justice, you're interested in how to change the law, go deep on that and work on that, because if you spread yourself too thin, you'll get nowhere. You'll just break your own heart. You do have to have successes as you pick the one thing. As you get further on, you can spread yourself around, but you got to put your stake in somewhere. And yeah, it feels like everybody else is doing exciting stuff, but you will not be sorry if you learn a lot of toxicology and then get your feet on the ground. I don't know if you have supplements on this, Tom.
Yeah, but don't forget your music. And I never stopped playing the accordion either. So that's another Jesuit education thing. Develop the whole person. And whether you develop yourself spiritually, musically, be a whole person. There are a lot of great scientists who can't communicate that science. Look at how we've struggled with COVID to get messages across to the people who need to hear them the most, right? And that's why we need diversity. And your question was about the students now. What a great time. Look how diverse St. Peter's is. Look at the backgrounds of students and this great, under one roof, mix of people with a common goal, right? To learn their craft, to further themselves, and to do good. And maybe to do well while doing good, too. And that's great. But we have this wonderful opportunity with students. And today, I think you're absolutely right. We were hippies and we wanted to save the world. We also wanted to avoid the draft against Frank Furman. But the students now, I've never seen such motivation. And a lot of things were galvanized recently, particularly with science denial. And so imagine you're a leading scientist and the world is saying, we don't believe you about climate. We don't believe you about vaccines. The greatest advance we've had in the past century in public health, right? We don't believe you about some fundamental tenets of science. Oh, stop it. We need to be better at communicating to the entire population. And really, we need scientists as diverse as our population. And that's what I'm seeing. I've never had such devoted students. I've never had such crowded classrooms and diverse people from all around the world who want to take that science, take that public health, take that medicine, and really do good.
I'm going to tell the students another quick secret, which is I have a couple of regrets of things I didn't learn. One is was Argus Eyes still active on campus?
Yes.
I never took an acting class. And you think, oh, isn't that silly? Why would you want to take an acting class? I swear to God, many times I've been in front of the California legislature, many times I've been in front of the federal Congress, maybe a dozen times. The ability to project yourself without letting them know that you're wearing Depends because you're so nervous is really, it's a set of skills that are, it's really important to have. I never took a public speaking class except when I was at St. Andrews. I had to do the reading at the Triclinium. This was the big refectory with about 150 young Jesuits in it. And I started out by saying, a reading from the Gospel of St. Paul. St. Paul said to the Ephesians, and there was a light that went off at the lectern, and I was up on this pulpit thing, and the Jesuit in the corner said, all of a sudden shouts out, "You have a lazy mouth, enunciate." Well, unfortunately, the next sentence had the word innumerable in it, and finally he blinked the light about 10 times and said, "Okay, go sit down." And he sat me in his office probably 20 times over the next month, making me read aloud and making me enunciate. That's my second one. Acting and public speaking is really worth having. The third one, it took me a while to understand, but you know this. Take an economics course, because if you really want to convince a politician to do something, emotion's important, their own constituent, always research where their constituencies are and what they do and where they're from. But then, if you can make an economic argument, you're way ahead of the game than simply talking about heartstrings. You know, I'm a doc, so I don't lead with economics, but they always challenge you on that.
So I teach public speaking, by the way.
Sorry?
And I teach public speaking. I'm teaching it this semester, and I wish I could actually do that to some of my students who really didn't do that well.
You blink a light?
Exactly.
So related to, so the commencement speaker in '74 was Alan Alda here at St. Peter's, down at Roosevelt Stadium. And
Well, some of the students might not know who Alan Alda is.
so Alan Alda, how do I explain this?
Yes.
MASH, reruns.
Me TV.
Pierce. One of the greatest actors of his generation was our speaker down at Roosevelt Stadium, and I love this guy. And I'm the top scientist in the Environmental Protection Agency. And what is Alan Alda doing now? But he's teaching scientists how to speak English. Now, I never took an acting class either, but I grew up in an Irish family, so I can act. But we need communication, and it's so important, and it's so important for our scientists. No, really. And we've been, let's say so, we've done press conferences, we've talked before the U.S. Senate. We were cross-examined at the White House on things we had to, and I love elected officials and governors are cool and everything, but they have no science. And if you don't put it in terms that they can understand, and let's face it, some of environmental science is very complicated, you're not going to get anywhere. And so I do think the education has to change. And it just brought me back to think of Hawkeye and Alan Alda speaking and encouraging us all in '74. And here he is, still fighting a good fight and bringing his skills as an actor to communication for public health.
So I do want to actually open it up to the audience for Q&A. Here's your opportunity to ask these two questions. Oh, of course, it's Bill. Bill always has a question.
Like you, I'm retired now, but I'm a former journalist and class of '71, so I was between the two of you. And the speaker at my commencement was Sir Cyril Richard, and he said, I have 2 words of advice for you as you prepare to go out into the world. don't go. What I wanted to say was, I really appreciate your passion and commitment to public health, climate change, and environmental justice. But I want to ask you, realistically, we're so late to the game now on climate change. Had we acted in '95 when the Kyoto Protocol was agreed upon, maybe, we would probably be in much, much better shape now. Is it too late? I don't want to be too much of a downer, but it doesn't look good.
Hey, Bill, John Tagliabue was in my class, and his father became the commissioner, and he was a writer for the New York Times, I think, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. Into my class at St. Peter's. This is going to sound almost trivial, but we're not going to be able to get through the next 100 years without the 3 cardinal virtues. You're going to have faith. And faith means that you're going to keep going no matter what you're up against, and you're going to take care of the things that are important. And faith and hope, I've always thought, are kind of 2 sides of a mirror, a coin. And it's going to take really caring for each other, the caritas. And so one of the things I had to learn in medicine, the first thing I had to learn was how to have clinical distance. I'm a pediatrician. I was in the tertiary care hospital, and about 1/3 of those children died, and I was there doing bone marrows and spinal taps, and I hate to use this term, but pumping poisons, the chemotherapy and all this sort of thing. And we still lost about 1/3 of the kids. By the way, anybody that thinks that they're against immunization has never seen a child who has cancer who then has chicken pox. Or you're there with a woman who's only in her 20s and is going to die of cervical cancer because she didn't get the vaccine against the virus, the virus. And you just do the best you can. And you have faith that even if I don't succeed, I'm doing the best I can. And so, a famous ex-Jesuit is my governor and my admired, he's not really a friend, but a colleague, Jerry Brown, who was at the Vatican talking about climate. And he said aloud to the entire group with Pope Francis right there, he goes, look, despair is not an option. We're going to have to do all we can. And he gave a very impassioned speech about what, and he was an ex-Jesuit, very much Jesuit trained, about what we need to do. Tom, you want to add to that?
It's not too late. We have to think about it differently, though. I think we have to think about climate adaptation in a way that we would love to really reduce carbon emissions into a level where we could reach global goals. We're not going to get there. Just think of how the war in Ukraine has changed the whole equation on energy independence and our need for fossil fuels right now. And you've all gotten gas recently, right? I bought it quick in Maryland before I drove up today because I think it's still lower there than in Jersey. But we are dependent on oil and gas for now. We have a path forward to transition. We have a path forward that can be incredibly good for economic development, for new industry, for diversity of our economic base. But we also have to work together on this. And it's like so many things in this country now. Climate is such a divisive issue, whether it's political in the president's budget, but we are all at the mercy of this changing climate, as you said. And it's going to take really a change in the mindset. It's going to take great young scientists and businessmen. It's going to take enlightened leadership in our oil and gas industry, in our chemical industry, and our major industries to see how innovation can change things. But I'm not giving up.
I want to say 2 things that Tom just triggered, one of them, and then the other, I want to not get through the time without saying it loud. you know, I talked about chemotherapy, and 50 years ago it was very primitive, and I remember, you know, we'd be the residents in the back room, and we'd say, I feel like I'm trying to fix a Swiss watch with a hammer. And really, when you look back on it, it was such a crude set of treatments. And nowadays, I have a very good friend who has multiple myeloma. He's had it for 7 years. He had a multiple myeloma, it wasn't multiple myeloma, it was melanoma. Melanoma the size of a tennis ball in his chest. And the drug therapy has shrunk it down to nothing. And he is, and it's much more mechanical, taking apart the genes and figuring out how to attack it way. And I think climate's the same thing. Fossil fuel burning is another poison, and we've got to move towards a much more scientific, smarter, and effective way of treating it. And we're sort of back in 1950 in terms of chemotherapy as we're dealing with fossil fuels. And science will be a solution to this. I want to just say one more thing before I don't want to miss saying this to the students. I was never bored once in my entire career. I am a little bit terrified of boredom, but it was so interesting, and I was so lucky to be involved with issues that I thought were important, and I think truly were important. And I'm not saying that to brag, I'm just saying because you want to get out of bed in the morning, you want to spend your life doing something that you think is important, that you feel and you value what you're doing. And so, yeah, you won't get rich working in government, and I encourage a lot of my smart young people to think about the State Department. And as one general said, I'd much rather have diplomats talking than have soldiers shooting. And the world is so much more interesting and more complex than you ever dreamed once you get into this.
We have a question over here. Right here.
Okay, so thank you. Inspiring is certainly an understatement in terms of your remarks. You are the quintessential products of Jesuit education and St. Peter's. And I'm happy to tell you that St. Peter's has joined Pope Francis's 7-year journey toward interreligious ecology and working with Loyola Chicago, and I hope I can send the video of this to them. I've notified them that you were coming tonight. We have a very active sustainability council here at St. Peter's, made of students, faculty, administrators. And, you know, Earth Week, we're going for it. We're going to try to be a tree campus higher education. What advice would you give to students, faculty, all of us who are passionate about making people aware of climate change, social justice, environmental justice? We'd really welcome some specific recommendations from you.
We can all play a role. And you don't have to be a professor to be talking about climate change. Walk the walk, talk the talk, understand that. What a wonderful relief it was when the Holy Father came out and supported our efforts on climate change. And you know, I've been amazed. I've had an incredible ride, like thinking, I got to meet the president because I did good in science at St. Peter's, right? And I thought I was going to be part of the group that went from the United States to meet with the Holy Father, but my boss, Gina McCarthy, went over and talked to the Pope about climate change. So I missed that one. Okay, we all won't have those kind of opportunities, but we can in our community groups, we can in our classrooms, we can at the ballot box. Really understand what an important issue this is. It's about our future, and it's really serious. And you know, I'm a Jersey state official. Jersey's going to get walloped as bad as any state because we got 129 miles of coast, and it's really changing. So if you love the Jersey Shore as much as I do, where I met my wife, who went to St. Peter's, think about the things we love, and think of how important the environment, and think of how important climate is, and don't be afraid to talk about it. Don't get in fights about it, but it doesn't have to be this huge divide that we have in this country now. It's not political. The science doesn't change by what party you're in. It's really the evidence, and let's get back to the evidence, and let's get back to doing those simple things we can all do to move in the right direction.
So I'm a member of the National Academy of Medicine. It's like 2,000 doctors, and I became increasingly upset, Bill, about 3 years ago, because the National Academy of Medicine, not science, but medicine, which is the brother of, wasn't doing anything around climate. They weren't going after the hospitals. They weren't going after the healthcare systems. 1/10 of all the greenhouse gas emissions are directly or indirectly related to the medical industrial complex. 17% of all the money in the United States is related to medical care. 10% of all the workers in the United States are related to medical care. And so at the National Academy meetings 3 years ago, I said I would like to hold a special session and invite people to come who might be interested in this. And I posted, all these docs are there, and, showing off their program, and there were deans and you name it. And I posted something, come to this interest group 19, climate change and health. And I didn't know anybody would show up. And we had about 70 very senior people, heads of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, on and on. And the president of the academy, who told me no one will come, showed up and his jaw dropped. And the secret here was, it was the old docs, physicians and scientists, who cared about it a lot, because we have a little more time, we're grandparents, etc. And the young physicians and the young leaders cared about it passionately. The ones in the middle who have mortgages and kids and just life demands, and they're trying to get their programs going, just were feeling overwhelmed. But because of this outpouring, the National Academy has made climate change, and this is going to sound crazy, one of the extra points, because when you're nominated, there's 2,000 nominees and they take 100 a year. And if you're doing climate change, we now get success in getting the Xbox, you get boosted up in the, if you will, it's like a sports competition. But I was nervous because I didn't know if anybody would show up, and the president of the academy was going to beat me up. He didn't beat me up, because everybody else in the room was going, no, this is important, pay attention. So it wasn't real courage, because I wasn't going to lose anything by losing that battle, except maybe being a little embarrassed. But having red hair and being 5'8", 130 pounds, I was always embarrassed. So I've gotten over that.
We have another question. Okay.
So many questions. You've been in the fight at the state level, the local level, the federal level. We're arguing about masks. We're arguing about whether immunization is worthwhile. We're so polarized. You're in a blue state. You're lucky right now, I guess. I think. But we're so polarized across the country. Everywhere you go, you're either red or black. You're either white or black. You're either one color or another. And it's paralyzing us. The Senate is essentially a 50-50 body. The House probably is going to change. How we even argue about science. The government, the federal government says, this federal government at least, says follow science, but science is confusing. The CDC is somewhat disorganized. Would that be kind?
Disemboweled.
So, whatever, at this point in time, we have a president at least that says he's following the science, but there's still rampant polarization and confusion. Do you know a way out of this? Do you have any suggestions as to it? You've been in the ditches there. You've fought the fight at the executive level and at the legislative level. Tell me what you learned.
I'll just jump in first, Tom, but you all know what Murphy's Law is? Yeah? Do you know what Murphy's second law is? Murphy's second law is, whatever they're arguing about, it's about money. Think about that. Because I think underneath so much of this, and everything in environmental health, is you say, I don't want chromium, and I want somebody who polluted the place to clean it up. They're going to threaten to break your legs. And I saw that in many other battles. Everything in environmental health is a battle, and I'm not joking. And other areas, it's just stupid to be fighting about immunization. I say that as a man who was the son of a fellow that died of polio. And in medicine, we deal a lot with the reluctant patient, the patient that doesn't want to hear it. And all you can do is approach them with love and support. Although sometimes you just have to fire the patient. You can't do anything. There is another medical rule, by the way. What patient should you be afraid of? No. What patient should you be afraid of? I'm not making this up. The patient who is afraid of you. And so people that are carrying fear, you have to sort of deal with Pat's a firefighter. You know, people that are carrying fear towards you, yeah, you can beat them up and push them down, but in general, you have to kind of get around that fear to do what you need to do. So, but only love can break your heart.
So your question to me is personal. Remember in my introduction, it said I was nominated by President Obama. I was not confirmed by the Senate because of the oil and gas states and their votes on the committees that confirmed the nominee. And there are a lot of other nominees who were blocked in a very divided Senate. But this was personal. And why? Climate change was a big part of that. Because there's Tom Burke. Look at all the things he did in New Jersey. He's an overreaching regulator. And there were arguments in my 2 confirmation hearings about is climate change science definitive? No science is definitive. And that's the issue that we have as scientists. It's constantly moving forward. We're constantly learning more. And so, is this a permanent situation where there will always be partisanship about science and will be blocked because of financial conflicts of interest or because of the power of the oil and gas industry, for instance, or certain other industries that are in it for their bottom line? No. I continue to be optimistic. Look at New Jersey. Look at the industrial change we saw in New Jersey, and who would ever think that we would be environmental leaders, that we would have such great clean beaches, that we would lead the charge to ban ocean dumping, that we would lead the charge for people on the fence line to have the right to know about chemical emissions, that became a national law. So maybe it's because I'm from St. Peters in Jersey City, but you can have hard conversations when you're from Jersey City, right? Because let's say you've got to talk yourself out of a lot of different things, like having somebody not beat the crap out of you, right? And so, I remain optimistic, but we fail to have the conversations. We fail to sit down with the leaders in the oil and gas industry. It's just so divided right now. And I hope that enlightened business leaders, I hope that students who are in science, and I hope that our educational institutions can be more open and not just falling into one camp or the other and just continuing this divide that we see that is really tearing science apart and really damaging the way that we function.
I can't resist. One real quick one. So I was on the CDC Advisory Committee on Childhood Lead Poisoning. You can imagine, pediatrician knows toxics. And this is back in the early 80s. Actually, when I was in med school, I would commute from Bradley Beach on Monday morning to go over to Mount Sinai as a first year, between first and second year med student. I was working on the pediatric ward. And I went on the ward one day, and there were about 15, 20 little kids running around like crazy on the ward at Sinai. And I said to the attendant, I said, they look fine. You know, why are they here? Because, oh, they're being chelated for lead poisoning. Chelating is where you put an intravenous in and you drip in these chemicals that would pull out the lead, and also, by the way, calcium, iron, and other divalent cations from the body. Because they had blood leads with 60 and 70. And he took me into a back room, and here was a child convulsing who was about 2 and dies of lead poisoning, blind and unconscious. And I said, oh man, and I said, you know, I wonder if I could get my lead checked. And my blood lead was 22. It was exactly the average of an American in 1971. Lead was in our paint, and I think my cousin Billy was poisoned by the lead paint right there on Delaware Avenue where Uncle Bill was blowtorching the paint. I'm not making that up. Lead was in the gasoline. I talked about lead in Bayway, but the kids on lower floors of buildings had much more lead in than the children on the upper floors. 10 micrograms of lead in your blood is the equivalent of 10 micrograms is 2 IQ points. So I had lost 5 IQ points by having that much lead in my brain. And so when I got to CDC, I put together an advisory committee on lead poisoning, put the best docs and scientists in the country, including 2 or 3 doctors from the lead industry, because that's the way you have to do it in the federal government. You should have to do it in the government, you have both sides. And early in the Bush administration in 2001, I came into work one morning and I had 11 advisory committees under me, you know, radiation and on and on and on, cruise ships, believe it or not. And they said, here, look at this. And the administration had fired 6 or 7 of the people on the Childhood Lead Poisoning Advisory Committee, and we had gotten lead down to about 5 at that point for the country, had fired them and handed me 3 doctors from the lead industry instead. And I leaked this story to Science Magazine. It was the front page editorial in Science Magazine. And a couple weeks later, Tommy Thompson, the head of Health and Human Services, comes down and announces that Dr. Jackson has decided to go work in the director's office at CDC and put somebody else in charge of my center. And after that meeting, I walk out and he looks at me and goes, gives this big tomcat smile and says, how's the wise guy now? Good news is Arnold Schwarzenegger hired me to be health officer for California, and I won't get into Schwarzenegger's stories, but he actually is a decent man. His own set of problems, but he's a decent man. But you know, you got to be prepared to take your lumps and sometimes get fired if you're doing the right thing. And I didn't apologize to anybody. Sorry, too long a story, but I can't help it.
Thank you for sharing. So I know Ray has a question.
Good evening. First of all, Tom and Dick, thank you very much. Your remarks are wonderful, and thank you for being here. I'm going to lean into just a bit the previous question. And this question really is sort of at the confluence of science and Arnabelle's field, communication. But a bit of context is necessary. About 20 years ago, so this would have been pre-Inconvenient Truth, I had the good fortune of attending a lecture given by the head of Greenpeace. A friend of mine was on the board of directors, and the lecturer, the head of Greenpeace, spent about an hour and a half talking about global climate change. And he went through every bit, including the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, test borings in Antarctica. It was absolutely compelling presentation. And when it came time for Q&A, I posed the question of, if this is such compelling science, why are we starting to hear rumblings? And by the way, in those days, there were rumblings on the right that were discounting it and saying that, no, this is just a phase of weather we're going through. I can still remember his response. He said, basically he trivialized the question, and basically he said, look, you may hear those rumblings, but those rumblings are going to go away because the science is so compelling and the data is so clear. Well, of course, 20 years later, they aren't rumblings, they're an outcry. An outcry that many, many tens of millions of Americans believe. So the question is, and by the way, about a year ago, David Brooks in the Times had a wonderful op-ed piece where he said, the least effective way of changing someone's mind is giving them data. It's true. And then hence, the question really is the confluence of science and communication. If the science is so compelling, how, and I'd like all three of you to comment on this one, how do we communicate that in a way that people accept it and don't dismiss it as simply talk that comes from the left?
I do know what I teach in public speaking, right? The three tenets, the logos, pathos, and ethos, when one is putting together a persuasive speech to convince someone to do something like maybe get a vaccine, right? Or a booster. And I say, you know, and if you think about like what's happening with COVID now, right? We're talking millions of people now dead, right? The bigger the number, the least, have you noticed? We don't seem to care anymore. And that's why the storytelling is really important, where you have to, as communicators, as journalists, we have to find the stories to make it relatable to the people, right? To make it relatable so that when they read something happening somewhere else too, we're like, wow, that person's a mom like me. Oh my gosh, that person is a college student like me. That person is like me. And I know as a journalist and also a professor who teaches public speaking, that is called pathos. You know, trying to use the narratives and the stories to connect these big numbers. Because when you look at school shootings, when I was a reporter, if there were 5 students that were killed in a shooting, that was a big deal. Now, an assignment desk will ask, well, how many people died? Okay, 5, 20 maybe now would be considered a school shooting where you would send your reporter. And I feel like, especially with COVID now, right? The bigger the number, the less we want to hear about it. And that's why it's so important to make it real, to use the pathos, to use these narratives, to get people to really understand those narratives, to make it relatable. I mean, I don't know how you feel. I mean, I know in your field it's all about the numbers.
My friend Ed Maybeck, who's the lead on communications he's down at Georgetown, on communication on climate, has the saying, numbers numb, stories stick. But there are 2 other quotes that came to mind as you were speaking. One was by the Putin-like Joseph Stalin, who said, "One death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic." And I think it captures just what you said. The other quote comes from, I think it's Upton Sinclair, but you could correct me, which was, "You can never convince a man to change his mind if his livelihood depends on what he's doing." And when you look at the gangsterism that the tobacco industry pulled from 1963 forward, and all the years of denial and obstruction and hideous behaviors that the tobacco industry pulled, and my university, UCSF, has an entire room of 70,000 documents from the tobacco industry, from the trials that you can go through and you read this stuff. And I actually had docs stand up and yell at me that I was against smoking in the later, same thing with the lead poisoning industry. And we discovered later on they were being paid off by those industries, even though they looked us straight in the eye and said they weren't being paid off. And Exxon has those same kind of communications people, and they've been doing this. They just stopped the appointment of somebody to the Federal Reserve, Jamie Raskin's spouse, I can't think of her name, but it's always about money. And you just have to keep pounding away, and you have to have the data, and you have to have the emotion. Pathos, ethos, and logos. I love that.
I talked about Alan Alda and I talked about making it real. Data doesn't make it real for most people. Well, why did we make change in New Jersey? One of the most moving things in my entire career came at a very early point in my career, and I was in Rutherford, New Jersey at the Pierpont School, where 5 young kids had leukemia. And I had to go interview the parents as part of the study, the epidemiologic study, and talk to a parent who just lost their 10-year-old Little League star son. And you will remember that interview for the rest of your life. And that story put a tough spotlight on New Jersey about the cancer cluster in Rutherford, New Jersey. But New Jersey began to take it seriously. We didn't even have a cancer registry. We didn't even know how to count cancer then. It wasn't a reportable disease. We moved it forward. We began to study the environment around areas like Nutley and out on routes that we cleaned up the meadowlands. We began to make change when the entire state, R's and D's, blues and reds, realized this is really important. We're not there with climate yet. We have really good companies that know how to kind of raise doubt about the science to buy a few more years. And they're using that tobacco playbook. But I also know, I think you used to be able to smoke in here before class. And we have made enormous progress on so many public health issues. And we're 2 years into this COVID thing. And we're going to be grappling with this, unfortunately, throughout the rest of our lives, right? And we have to move forward, not with just data, but with real people telling the stories, those talking heads. And I know that most of them are colleagues, and Johns Hopkins is there with the numbers every day, right? But those are real people. Those are real, we've lost real people. And when we tell that story and communicate it differently, we reach people, and they can come together and have those tough discussions and have the pressure to make positive change.
I've probably been in 100 public meetings where it's just brutal. People screaming and crying, and I won't tell the details of a lot of them. Do you know what the beginning of the anti-smoking movement was? The most powerful traction point was not the Surgeon General's report on tobacco and cancer. There was another small group that really pushed that first domino. So I was telling my son about 10 years ago, well, we went back to Jersey, we went to the shore, and we couldn't get on the plane going back to California, and so they put us on another plane. We ended up in the smoking section. And he said, Dad, come on. They didn't let people smoke on airplanes. He thought that was the stupidest thing he had ever heard, and he knows his dad's a clown, so he just figured that can't be true.
That's crazy.
The people that pushed the first domino were the flight attendants. No one was getting more exposed to secondhand tobacco smoke than the flight attendants. And the OSHA, the NIOSH, and the OSHA rules were put in place, and then it was bars, and then it was other indoor spaces. But there's another point I want to make with this, and I want to say this to the young women. I can't tell you how much of our environmental progress has come from impassioned women that don't want to accept a status quo. This is not right. And a mother who's making an argument is so much more powerful than a couple of old white guys. And I don't think you disagree with that.
We have another question over there.
Hello. So I've been paying attention, and it seems like a lot of people agree that data doesn't seem to make an impression on people anymore. At least not without the emotional part of it, like an individual story. But I don't feel like that's the same in schools and with younger children. I feel like they're more impressionable by the data itself, and they generally form emotions around that data. But unfortunately, right now, it seems like most of the people on the wrong side of the arguments are either too closed-minded or they have some sort of monetary interest in keeping whatever is causing the problems to be used. I was wondering if you guys thought, if you guys think that people are already too close-minded with the social media stuff, just reinforcing all of this false information. It seems like people who've already created their own opinions and have established their false facts around them, or at least false data. It seems like it might be too, like the very foundation is, yeah, like the, sorry. It seems like the data doesn't seem to affect people personally if they've already formed their own opinions, even if it's around false data. But the young people who are still creating their own opinions about these enormous problems.
Can I jump in? And first of all, I want to thank this high school student for standing up and speaking. This is a pretty situation. You know, speaking now as a physician, every one of us have had somebody in the room and we're telling them that your cholesterol and your triglycerides are too high and you got to do this and you got to do that. And guess how much impact we have? And you got to lose 30 pounds. And we're very accustomed to people don't respond to data. And by the way, they don't respond very well to terrifying them. I mean, I could march them into the morgue and they probably aren't going to change their behaviors. So I think there's a whole science around behavior change that I'm not really qualified to speak to. In fact, well, I'm going to say one quick one. Remember I talked about in the year 2000, I couldn't get anywhere talking about climate change? And I really grappled with it, and I finally stopped talking about you got to change carbon emissions. And the people in Atlanta emit 15 times as much carbon per person, cars and everything else, as the people in Barcelona. And that data is there. And that argument, the thing that people want is a good place to live. They want a place that's not polluted. They want to be around people that love them. They want green space. By the way, when I was 7 years old, went to Lincoln Park for the first time with my cousins, I thought I had died and gone to heaven. It was such a beautiful place and such a happy place to be. And by the way, we had a lot of autonomy. We just ran for the whole day there and come home exhausted, which is exactly what kids ought to do, because nobody has to tell you to calm down if you're zonked out. And so that's how I became passionate with the built environment, and over time was able to really convince the architects, urban planners, and landscape architects to really think about the redesign of the cities and the developers. But then I had to phrase it as something you need to do for your income. And I literally had the head of the Urban Land Institute, a guy who owned more land in Florida than anybody else in the country, say, you know, I think we got to stop building around golf courses and build around personal happiness. And there's an article about this, you know, Jimmy Buffett tile community for old folks and retirees in Florida. And you know, they're all going around in electric golf carts, probably drinking too much, but at least they're happy and have a low carbon footprint and are not destroying the planet. Tom, you got any thoughts on this one? Too many.
I think what you were also addressing was this idea that, I mean, it's there, right? We want to believe in what we want to believe, and we are no longer listening, right? And that's like the problem. And I know, at least in my public speaking class, one of the lessons that I try to teach my students that it's also important to listen. Because we're so ready to tell, whether you're arguing with your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your professor or your mom, right? You're not listening because you're already thinking about what you want to say back at them. And that is, right? We all know that, we've all been there. And that is really like one thing that we really have to start doing, I think, as people, again, is really listening to each other. Because we're so just, we're just thinking about what we want to say. And I think that's what's so great about like discussions like this, is just taking the time to listen to what you two are saying without having to worry about what we want to say back at you.
And I think social media has made it hard. I hate to admit it, but sometimes I'm feeling low, I don't have much energy, and I know I've got to write a paper or read a complicated thing. And I sit there and open Twitter, and I'm ashamed to admit that. But it's the quick hits are just more appealing sometimes than. In fact, what I learned in this school was all knowledge makes a bloody entrance.
Oh, wait a minute.
And it wasn't that you need to be beaten to learn, but it is thinking is hard work. And the Jesuits, I remember being told, they would look me in the eye and say, I'd get a stupid answer. He'd say, think. And it almost hurt to think through what I was being asked.
I'm going to do that tomorrow. Mary Kate, I'm going to do that in class. Think.
Think.
So I don't know if there are other questions, but I want to tell a little story, like a president's story, all right? And this is for the students. So, just, first of all, St. Peter's is a place, it's hard to think of it now, but it's a place where dreams have their foundation and they actually come true if you keep working on them. And I remember like it was yesterday, and Marva, my wife, knows this, and I got a call down at Hopkins. I was enamored with President Obama, the change that was coming to this country when he got elected. And I'm sitting there in a huge auditorium at Hopkins on the big screen, we're watching the inauguration. And he's talking about science, and he's talking about the environment. And I said to the graduate student, I can work for this guy. Well, I'm sitting in my office at Hopkins, and my assistant comes in. I said, Tom, this call is the White House. I'll put it through. I'll take it. Pick up the phone. And Tom, this is, I won't give his last name, John from the Executive Office of the President, would like you to come down and talk to us about joining the President's leadership team. All right. When? Yeah, sure. I go down there, and so I go down there, and it's a real hot day, and I have a suit on, and my nose is running, and I just want to blow my nose, and I go to the White House, and I'm being interviewed, and because I'm going to have top secret clearance, I'm going to be in the White House, and you're the president, you can trust me. They ask me really tough questions. So, keep your nose clean. All right? You gotta live a good life. I mean, St. Peter tells you to have those values, but don't be a crazy person. Try not to get busted. It really happens. It screws up your life. So I had a hole in my heart, so I didn't do a lot of experimentation that others in my generation did. Anyhow, the big question was, Dr. Burke, I'm thinking they're gonna ask me all about science and my views on climate. Dr. Burke, have you ever done anything that might embarrass the President of the United States? So, I'm me, President. Well, does he embarrass easily? And they didn't laugh. And my sisters are here, and they know I've done a lot of embarrassing things in my life, because I tend to be a little bit of a jokester. And, we talked about it. And I said, I don't think so. I think if you check my record, and you won't believe this, for St. Peter's grad, I don't even think I have a speeding ticket. And I have tried to live a really good life. And now you're not talking about my family, are you? Because there's a lot of Irish cops and firemen, and I'm from a big, crazy Irish family, so there might be some embarrassment there, but you can check my record. Anyhow, the lesson is, really try to be careful if you aspire to great heights. And you'll hear this. You hear if you want to go into medicine, that there's, right. And they told me to get off social media. But then at the end of the vetting process, I'm breezing through this. I'm beating all the other candidates, and I'm going to get this nomination. And the last conversation was with Gina McCarthy, who's now the president's climate czar in the White House now. But I had my final interview with her. The administrator got to nominate me to recommend my nomination to the president. And we're sitting there over a salad and at this restaurant across from the White House, and she said, I'm saying, Gina, don't you have any questions? Yeah, Tom, she's from South Boston. So she, Jersey City Irish, she's South Boston. And she said, yeah, what are you afraid of? And I'm thinking, my scientist says that's a brilliant interview question. And of course, this is a really tough job, and there's lots of things to be afraid of. But I didn't know Coach Holloway at the time. But I said, from Jersey City, nothing. And I got the job.
So I want to thank the two of you for this wonderful conversation. Tom Burke, Dick Jackson, thank you so much for stepping up, coming back here to your alma mater. Because, peacocks flock together.
And I think we should thank our beautiful host and MC.
Oh, thank you. And thank you everyone for coming tonight to watch the sun go down here at Dinning Hall. But thank you so much. This was a
Come back for the
pleasure.
parade, right?
Yeah. We're coming to the parade, right? Yes. It's gonna be right out here, the rally. But thank you again.
Yeah.